Growing up, my big brother Sam was everything I wanted to be. Cool, fearless, and always the center of attention. He had this effortless charm, the kind that made everyone gravitate towards him. He was also a bit of a troublemaker though. Nothing too serious, he just liked pushing the boundaries. And me, I was the annoying little brother who always wanted to tag along. I remember one Halloween when I was 9, I think. I usually went trick-or-treating with my younger cousins, while Sam, being older, went off with his friends. But that year, I was determined to go with Sam. I begged him over and over, until finally he sighed and said fine. But he said I'd have to go through initiation first. I had no idea what that meant, but I agreed. Anything to hang out with my big brother. Halloween night came and I was buzzing with excitement. I put on my Spider-Man costume and rushed into Sam's room. He wasn't even dressed yet, which really confused me. When he saw me, he just grinned. He said I had forgotten that I had to pass the initiation test before I could go out with him and his friends. I actually had forgotten about it. I nodded and asked what it was. Sam just laughed and told me I'd find out soon. He grabbed his car keys and told me to get in. Sam drove to pick up his friends Rico and Pete. They were laughing the whole way while I sat in the back, unsure of what was coming. We pulled up in front of this old, abandoned house. It looked like it was ready to collapse, with broken windows and a sagging roof. I asked Sam why we were here. Sam turned to me, his face serious for once. He then told me about the house, a story I will never forget. He said, years ago, a guy killed his wife in there, chopped her head off. They say every Halloween, her ghost, headless, wanders around, looking for her head. A chill ran down my spine. I asked Sam if he was just trying to scare me, and he shook his head no, but Pete and Rico were obviously trying to keep from laughing, but failing to do so. I couldn't tell if Sam was being serious or not. Sam then asked me if I still wanted to go out with him and his friends. I nodded my head yes. He then told me what I had to do. He told me I had to go inside, get a pumpkin from the second floor, and bring it back. If I did that, then I could go out with them, and if I didn't, then he was taking me home. I didn't want to admit how terrified I was. I glanced at the house, then back at Sam. I wanted so badly to impress him, to prove I wasn't just his annoying little brother. So, I agreed to do it. As I got out of the car, Rico and Pete couldn't keep their failed attempts of laughing in, but I couldn't tell if they were laughing at me or just the situation. The front door of the house was unlocked, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. It smelled like dust and mold. The floor creaked under my feet, and the dim light filtering through the windows barely lit the way. I spotted the staircase right away, its steps sagging and rotting. I took a deep breath and climbed up, each step groaning beneath me. At the top, 3 doors faced me. Sam hadn't said which room the pumpkin was in. I opened the first door. Nothing but trash scattered across the floor. The second room was the same. My heart pounded as I approached the third door, the one at the end of the hall. It was darker in there, no windows to let the fading daylight in. I pushed the door open. The room was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. I stepped inside, squinting, trying to make out the shape of the pumpkin. Then, I heard a voice. "I don't think you should be in here, kid." My heart stopped. The voice was low, coming from the far corner of the room. I didn't want to see who or what it was. I screamed and bolted for the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps as I ran down. As I reached the bottom, I crashed into someone. For a split second, I thought it was the ghost, but then I looked up and saw Sam. I tried to tell him that someone was up there, but it was probably barely understandable. Sam laughed. He told me that no one was up there, and he had just made the whole story up, and that I made it way further than he expected. I shook my head, trying to convince him, but before I could say another word, we both heard it, the creak of footsteps above us. We froze, staring up at the ceiling. The footsteps grew louder, moving towards the top of the stairs. Then we heard a door slowly creak open. Without saying a word, Sam grabbed my arm and dragged me out of that house. We scrambled into the car, and Sam peeled out of the driveway, his friends shouting in confusion. As we sped away, I glanced back at the house. There, in one of the second-floor windows, a figure stood, a man. He was watching us, smiling. Sam didn't say a word for the rest of the drive. I had never seen him so scared. To this day, we don't know who or what was in that house, but I do know one thing. Sam never brought up initiation again, and we never went back. I remember the last Halloween my friends and I ever went trick-or-treating. We were 17, but we were all still kids at heart, and honestly, I think we would have kept going even after that, if not for what happened that night. It was me, Javier, and Blaine. Every year we had this tradition, meeting up at Javier's house to change into our costumes. We'd always pick a theme, and this year it was Marvel's superheroes. I was Iron Man, Javier was Captain America, and Blaine was the Hulk. Javier and I cracked up when Blaine came out of his room in his huge inflatable Hulk costume, stumbling around and knocking into everything. He looked like he was about to tear the whole house down. After we got our laughs in and grabbed our bags, we piled into Javier's car. We had our Halloween routine down to a science. We knew which neighborhoods gave out the best candy, and our first stop was always this one place that had full-size candy bars. Jackpot every year. For the first hour, everything was normal, running from house to house, filling our bags and trying to outdo each other with jokes and dares. But as the night wore on and it got darker, we decided to hit up this sketchier neighborhood down the road. It wasn't the nicest area, but we had gotten some good stuff there in the past. We parked on the edge of the neighborhood and started making our way down the street. It wasn't long before we realized that most of the houses had already turned off their porch lights. The trick-or-treating was over. Still, we didn't feel like calling it a night just yet, so we decided to walk around a bit before heading back to the car. And that is when I noticed him. About 50 feet behind us, there was a guy dressed in a Michael Myers costume. You know, the white mask, the jumpsuit, everything. I nudged Blaine and Javier and pointed him out. Javier, always the loud one, turned around and shouted at the guy, telling him nice outfit. The guy didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at us. Javier shrugged it off, but I felt uneasy. Something about the way the guy just stood there, silent, gave me the creeps. We started walking again, but a few minutes later I looked back and that guy was still there, following us, closer this time. I told Javier, who turned around and yelled at him again. He called him a couple of names, but the guy didn't move, didn't say a word, just stared. That's when Javier took a few steps towards him. He threatened him that he would regret it if he didn't stop following us. The guy didn't flinch. I pulled on Javier's arm, telling him it wasn't worth it. Javier flipped the guy off and came back to us, but we all started walking a little faster. I glanced back one more time and felt a chill run down my spine. The guy was even closer now, and under the street light, I saw it. He was holding a large kitchen knife, just like in the movie. I whispered to Blaine, asking him if he thought it was real. He didn't have to respond for me to see the fear in his eyes. Javier, still trying to act tough, said there was no way it was real, but even he picked up the pace. We all did. The guy in the Michael Myers costume matched our speed, walking faster as did we, until finally reaching Javier's car. We practically dove inside, slamming the doors shut. I shouted at Javier to lock the doors, which he did. The locks clicked into place, but the guy was right there, standing just a few feet in front of the car. He lifted the knife and slowly dragged it across the hood, leaving a deep scratch that made the worst screeching sound I'd ever heard. Blaine screamed at Javier to get out of there. Javier didn't need to be told twice. He threw the car into reverse, peeled out of there, and sped down the street. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. The guy was just standing in the middle of the road, just watching us drive off. I couldn't shake that feeling that he was smiling under that mask. We didn't say a word the whole ride back to Javier's house. When we finally got there, we locked the doors and went straight to his room. At first, we tried to laugh it off, making jokes about how crazy the guy had been, but Blaine couldn't shake it. He kept saying that he thought the guy would actually have hurt us. We were sorting through our candy when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of something tapping against the window. We all turned at once, and there he was. The guy in the Michael Myers costume was standing outside the window, staring right at us. We screamed. All three of us bolted out of the room and ran to Javier's dad. He grabbed a bat and ran outside, but by the time he got there, the guy was gone. The only thing left was that kitchen knife, lodged into the siding of the house. To this day, we have no idea who that guy was. Maybe it was part of a twisted prank, but part of me still thinks he really wanted to hurt us. We never went trick-or-treating again. Halloween has never been my favorite holiday. I don't mind the costumes or the decorations, but something about it just feels off. Maybe it's the weird people who come out, or the fact it's always dark so early. However, I did always enjoy watching the kids trick-or-treat. They'd come up to the house all dressed up, and I'd pass out candy while my parents took out my little brother for his rounds. Every year, I'd stay home, watch scary movies, and hand out candy to the little witches and superheroes that showed up. That night, my senior year, started the same way as every Halloween before it. I watched as my parents and little brother left, their laughter fading down the street. I turned on the porch light, grabbed the candy bowl, and settled in on the couch, flipping through the channels until I finally landed on Friday the 13th, the original classic. I plopped down, ready for a quiet evening of movie watching and candy passing. Not even 10 minutes in, the doorbell rang. I hopped up, opened the door, and smiled at the group of kids yelling trick or treat. Their costumes were adorable. Tiny pirates, princesses, and skeletons. I handed out candy, complimented their outfits, and watched them scamper off. This went on for the next hour. Doorbell, candy, smiles, repeat. I barely had time to sit back down between the groups. Then, around 8:30, the doorbell rang again. I got up, bowl in hand, expecting another swarm of excited kids. But when I opened the door, there was just one person. A tall figure, dressed in all black. Black pants, a black hoodie, and a red demon mask. The mask was disturbing, its exaggerated features twisted in a grotesque grin. But what really got me were the eyes. Through the holes in the mask, I could see their eyes, locked on me, staring, unblinking. I stood there, awkwardly holding a bowl of candy, waiting for them to say something. But they didn't. No trick or treat, no motion for candy, just silence. I tried to smile, half-heartedly, and reached out to drop some candy in their bag. But that's when I realized they didn't have a bag. I asked if I could help them, but no response. They just stood there, their eyes staring straight into mine. The silence stretched out, and unease grew. I asked again if they needed something, louder this time. Nothing. Annoyed and a little more freaked out, I shouted at them, telling them to stop being a creep and to leave. Then, I slammed the door in their face. I peeked through the window next to the door, trying to see if they'd left, but I couldn't get a good angle. My heart was racing. This is exactly why I wasn't a fan of Halloween. The weirdos always come out. I sat back down, determined to ignore it, and tried to get back into the movie. I even ate a few pieces of candy to calm my nerves. It didn't take long, but I got back into the movie and forgot about that creepy person. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Grabbing the candy bowl, I walked to the door and I opened it, and nearly dropped the bowl. It was the same person, still standing there, still in the same position, arms at their sides, eyes locked on me. It was as if they hadn't moved at all. My chest tightened and I felt my pulse in my throat. I asked again what they wanted. I tried to seem fierce, but the way my voice was cracking, I wasn't fooling anyone. As before, no response or movement from the person. I was absolutely terrified. I tried to slam the door again, but it stopped short. Confused, I looked down and saw their foot wedged in the doorframe, keeping it from closing. Panic hit me as I glanced back up. Through the narrow crack in the door, I could see their mask pressed up against it, one eye staring directly at me through the slit. I screamed and backed off the door just a bit, and then falling into the door, trying to close it as hard as I could. But as I pushed, there was a scream. The person's hand was caught in the door. They yanked it back and I threw the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. My heart was hammering in my chest as I backed away, grabbing my phone. I called my dad, and when he picked up, I stammered through the story. As I spoke, there was a loud, violent banging on the door. I could hear my dad telling me to call the police, that they were on their way home, but my mind was racing. I hung up and dialed 911, frantically explaining the situation to the dispatcher. They told me to stay on the line and lock myself in a room, but before I could move, there was a loud crash, the sound of glass shattering. The person had just broke the front window. I looked over long enough just to see them sticking their hand through the broken part of the window. I screamed and bolted upstairs, tears streaming down my face as I locked myself in my bedroom. The dispatcher was still on the phone, trying to get me to calm down, telling me the police were on their way, but all I could do was cry and beg for help. I crawled under my bed, clutching the phone, every second stretching out like an eternity. It was silent for what felt like forever. I didn't know if they were still in the house or if they had left. Then I heard my dad's voice calling my name from downstairs. I crawled out from under the bed and ran down, throwing myself into his arms. The police arrived a few minutes later. They searched the house, but the intruder was gone. All they found was the shattered window and deep scratches on the front door. I never saw the person again, but that night haunts me. I haven't celebrated Halloween since, and every time I hear a knock at the door, I can't help but remember those eyes staring back at me through the mask. I'll never forget that Halloween a few years ago. My best friend Katie and I were still on our post-college partying phase. We didn't need much of an excuse to go out, especially on Halloween, but that night we wanted to do something different, something that really captured the spirit of the holiday. Neither one of us had to work the next day, so we figured, why not? We skimmed through a few bars that were doing Halloween-themed events, but nothing stood out. None of them had that creepy, thrilling vibe that we were hoping for. So, we decided to head downtown and wander around, hoping to stumble upon something a little more exciting. As we walked down the street, we turned a corner and saw a narrow alley. At the end of the alley, a small group of people were gathered by a door, all wearing those old-fashioned plague doctor masks. I stopped in my tracks and nudged Katie. I asked her what she thought was going on there. She smiled and said we should go figure it out. We stood there, debating whether we should approach, when an older couple casually strolled past us and headed straight for the alley. Katie whispered that this was our chance. We quickly caught up to the people, pretending like we were with them. When we got to the door, the person in the mask nodded and handed us each one of the plague masks. The mask was cold as it slid over my face. Katie gave me a look. This was almost too easy. With no idea what to expect, we followed the couple inside. As soon as we walked through the door, I realized this wasn't some typical Halloween party. The room was set up like a makeshift church with rows of chairs facing a small stage. There were at least 30 people sitting down, all wearing the same eerie mask, their face hidden behind those beak-like noses. I whispered to Katie that this was really weird and that we should leave. But Katie, always the thrill seeker, nudged me back. She convinced me to stay a little bit longer to figure out what was actually going on. I reluctantly agreed, but insisted we wouldn't stay long. We found 2 empty seats in the back and sat down, feeling completely out of place. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the room lit only by dim candles placed along the aisles and on the stage. A few minutes passed, and then the lights dimmed even further. The only light left was the flickering glow of the candles. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the stage. They were wearing a mask like the rest of us, but it was red and far more elaborate, almost regal. The air in the room felt heavy as everyone stood up in unison. Katie and I quickly followed suit, standing awkwardly with the others. Without warning, the entire room began chanting in a low, rhythmic tone. It was an ominous hum, something ancient and unsettling. My stomach knotted, and I grabbed Katie's hand, giving it a tight squeeze. I whispered that we needed to leave now. Katie didn't argue this time. She squeezed my hand back, her face hidden behind the mask, but I could feel her unease. We slowly shuffled towards the edge of the aisle, trying not to draw attention. But as we reached the end, we were blocked by someone else wearing a mask. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, thinking for sure we were caught. The figure silently handed each of us a small cup. I stared down at it, the dim light barely illuminating the thick red liquid inside. It looked like blood. My stomach turned as I wondered if it really could be blood. I glanced at Katie and saw her hand trembling, the cup shaking slightly. That was it. I wasn't sticking around to find out what this was. I set my cup down on the chair and grabbed Katie by the arm, tugging her towards the door. We tried to move casually, but my heart was racing. Another figure stood near the exit, watching us. For a moment, I thought they were going to stop us, but I pushed past them, yanking Katie along with me, and bolted out the door. We didn't stop running until we were out of the alley and back on the main street. Breathing heavily, we ripped off the masks and tossed them to the ground. We stumbled into one of our usual bars, collapsing into chairs as we tried to catch our breath. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, trying to process what just happened. The whole thing felt surreal, like a twisted nightmare we just escaped from. We tried to talk about it, but neither one of us knew what to say. We never called the cops. What would we even say? To this day, I have no idea what we walked into that night, but whatever it was, I'm just thankful we got out when we did. My name is Jenny, and I remember that Halloween like it was yesterday. I must have been around 14 or 15, that awkward age where trick-or-treating wasn't cool anymore, but I also wasn't old enough to drive or do anything too exciting. It was weird. I didn't want to miss out on Halloween entirely, but I also didn't want to be stuck at home either. Selena, my best friend, suggested that we go to a small Halloween party that one of our classmates was throwing. I wasn't sure about it at first, but it gave me an excuse to dress up, something that I still secretly loved. After all, what's Halloween without costumes? On Halloween, I pulled out my witch costume. Classic, I know, but it was always a solid choice. Selena apparently had one just like it, and we just happened to pick the same outfit. We laughed and we both ended up with the same idea and then set out for the party. A few minutes later, we arrived at the guy's house who was throwing the party, Christian. I could hear music and muffled voices inside. We knocked on the door. Christian opened it quickly, dressed as some kind of vampire, and smiled at us. The party itself was small, maybe 10 people hanging out, some sipping beers and others playing games. It wasn't wild, but it seemed fun enough. After some awkward chit-chat and a bit of dancing, Christian came over and asked if we wanted to play a game. Selena and I nodded, and then Christian pulled out a box that made my heart drop. A Ouija board. I immediately shook my head. I had heard too many bad things about those. But Christian tried to convince me. I looked over at Selena, hoping that she'd back me up, but instead, she pulled me aside and told me to stop being a baby, and that it would be fun. Reluctantly, I agreed. I didn't want to look scared in front of Christian, or worse, Selena. So we went to a small back room with Christian and his friend Jack. The room was dimly lit, probably Christian's dad's office, with bookshelves lining the walls. Christian set the board down on the desk, and we all pulled up chairs. He lit a few candles, explaining that we had to keep our hands on the planchette the entire time, and most importantly, we had to say goodbye at the end. We all placed our fingers on the planchette, and Christian began asking questions. Things like, is anyone here with us, and what's your name? For the longest time, nothing happened. I started to relax, thinking Selena had been right. This was just a stupid game people use to scare kids. Then, Jack, being the idiot that he is, blurted out, "Where are all the demons?" Selena giggled, but Christian glared at him. He told Jack not to joke about stuff like that. That's when the planchette moved. It was subtle at first, just a slight twitch. I thought one of them was messing with me. But as it started to glide across the board, quickly spelling out hello, I could feel my pulse quicken. Christian snapped at Jack, telling him to stop messing around, but Jack swore it wasn't him. I looked at Jack and saw the genuine fear in his eyes. Selena laughed, still thinking this was all part of the game, but then Jack stood up, yanking his hand away from the planchette. We all yelled at him, reminding him not to take his hand off. Jack sat back down, muttering something under his breath. Christian immediately suggested we end the session. He told us to say goodbye and move the planchette to goodbye on the board. We all agreed. Christian started to move the planchette to goodbye, but before he could get there, it jerked out of his hands and shot to no. We all screamed. No one was touching the planchette anymore, and it began to move on its own, slowly spelling out something else. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as I watched it glide across the letters spelling, I see you. I bolted out of the chair, Selena close behind me. We didn't stop running until we were back at her house, out of breath and shaking. Neither one of us said a word, but we both knew what we saw. To this day, Christian and Jack swear they weren't messing around with the board. And as for me, I've never touched a Ouija board again. Halloween has always been my favorite time of year. The decorations, the costumes, the spooky atmosphere, I lived for it. My house was always the most decked out in the neighborhood. Every year, I'd have skeletons, cobwebs, and jack-o'-lanterns lining the walkway with eerie sound effects playing in the background. Kids loved coming to my house, and I loved seeing their excited faces when I passed out candy. But last year was different. I had come down with the flu the week of Halloween, forcing me to miss work and, worst of all, missing out on celebrating. Despite feeling terrible, I wanted the kids to have their candy. I had already bought several bags of candy, and I was determined to not let my sickness ruin the kids' night. Since I didn't want to risk getting anyone sick, I figured I'd just leave a huge bowl of candy by the door with a note that said, "Take some candy and please don't ring the doorbell." After setting everything up, I trudged back to bed, dizzy from the medication. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I started drifting off into a deep, drug-induced sleep. Right before I was going to pass out, my phone chimed. I had forgotten to turn off my Ring doorbell notifications. I groaned, rolling over to check it. The screen lit up, showing the grainy footage of tiny costumed figures shuffling up to the house. It made me smile, despite everything. At least the kids were still coming. I watched them grab their candy. I was thankful I could bring them a little Halloween joy, even if I couldn't enjoy it myself. Satisfied, I put my phone on silent and passed out. Hours later, I woke up suddenly. My throat was dry and my body ached from lying still for so long. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was a little after midnight. I also noticed there were several more Ring notifications, probably more kids coming by. Curious, I started scrolling through them. Nothing unusual, just the usual parade of princesses, superheroes, and monsters. But then I saw it, a notification from only 10 minutes earlier. I clicked on the video, and a figure appeared. Unlike the others, this wasn't a child. It was a clown, a tall, looming figure in tattered clown costume, standing eerily still at my doorstep. The person just stood there, not moving, not reaching for the candy, just staring at my door. Something about it sent a shiver down my spine. Why would a grown person be out trick-or-treating after midnight? And why were they just standing there? The clip ended before I could see more. No new notifications had come since. I hesitated, then opened the live view. I almost dropped my phone. The clown was still there, standing motionless in front of my door. The only difference now was that they were holding something in their hand. A knife. At first, I told myself it was probably just a prop, maybe some late-night pranksters trying to mess with me. But the sight of that figure, silent, unmoving, sent a wave of fear through me. The rational part of my brain told me to call the police, but the other part thought I should just use the intercom to scare them off. I pressed the button, my voice shaky as I spoke into the speaker. I said they needed to leave now, or I would call the police. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the clown's head turned towards the camera. It leaned in, its grotesque painted face filling the screen until all I could see was the distorted grin staring back at me. Then the feed went black. My heart hammered in my chest. The only way the camera could have gone out was if they broke it. I jumped up from bed just as a loud banging echoed through my house. They were pounding on my door. I ran downstairs, my pulse racing, but stopped just short of the door. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I pressed my face against the peephole. The clown's eye stared back at me. I screamed, stumbling back, my mind reeling. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. The operator stayed on the line with me, trying to keep me calm. But I couldn't stop thinking about that eye, the knife, and then silence. The banging stopped. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. Instead, I sat on the floor, clutching my phone, waiting for what felt like an eternity until I heard a knock at the door. I cautiously looked through the peephole again, relieved to see that familiar police uniform. I opened the door, shaky but thankful. Before I could speak, though, my eyes caught something written across my door in what looked to be red paint, or something worse. It said, "I made you scream." The police took my statement, and I showed them the footage from the Ring camera, but it didn't matter. No one was ever caught. No one fitting the description of that clown was ever found. Halloween is coming up again, and I haven't put up a single decoration. The thought of it fills me with dread now, where there was once excitement. Because no matter what I do, I can't shake that feeling that this Halloween, the clown might come back, and this time, I might not be so lucky. That Halloween was one I'll never forget. A few years back, I had just moved to a new city for work. The job was going great and my coworkers were friendly, always inviting me to lunch or drinks after work. After about 4 months, I felt like I was finally settling in. So when they invited me to a Halloween party one of them was hosting, I immediately said yes. I didn't want to seem antisocial. The host said costumes weren't necessary, which was a relief because I didn't have one. Halloween came around, and after work, I went home, showered, and threw on my usual clothes before heading to the party. To my surprise, I had a great time, better than I expected, but when I glanced at my watch, it was already past midnight. I had to be up early for work, and it looked like others were starting to leave too, so I made my rounds, said my goodbyes, and headed for my car. The party was in the city, but I lived in a quieter suburb about 20 minutes away. One of the roads home was a long, forested stretch that always felt more like the middle of nowhere than a suburb. A few minutes into the drive, something caught my eye. A girl, standing on the side of the road. She was young, dressed in a pale blue dress, and looked out of place given how late it was. I stopped and rolled my window down. I asked her if she was okay. I was a little unnerved by how still she was being. She nodded slowly and said that she was just trying to get home. I asked where she lived, and she mentioned an address that was just across from my neighborhood. I couldn't leave her out there, so I offered her a ride. She nodded again, and then got in without another word. The silence was thick as we drove, and I tried to make small talk to ease the tension. I asked her what her name was. She quietly responded Susan. When she spoke, she never looked at me, just kept staring straight, keeping her eyes on the road. I introduced myself and tried to figure out where she had come from. Her dress looked old-fashioned, like something from another time. I asked if she'd been to a Halloween party, and she said no, that she was walking home from school. That threw me off. School? At this hour? I asked her where her parents were. She said that they were waiting for her at home. Again, her tone was flat and emotionless. It didn't make any sense, but before I could ask anything else, we had arrived at the street she'd mentioned. I slowed down, scanning the old mailboxes until I saw the number she'd given me. The house was ancient, practically crumbling. It looked abandoned. I asked her if this was her house. She nodded, and for the first time since getting in the car, turned to look at me. She thanked me softly before getting out and walking towards the house. I watched her as she approached the door, waiting to make sure she made it inside safely. But then my phone buzzed, and I glanced down at my screen. It was Cody from work, checking to see if I got home safely. I quickly typed out a reply, telling him that I had a slight detour as I found a girl on the side of the road and had just dropped her off at her house. When I looked back up from my phone, she was gone. I blinked, thinking that she must have gone inside without me noticing. After a moment, I shrugged it off, I did a U-turn, and headed home. The next day at work, Cody came over to my desk laughing about how wild the party had been. A few others joined in, and soon enough, the topic turned to the girl I'd taken home. I started telling them how strange the situation had been, how she said her parents were waiting for her but wore this outdated dress. Everyone went silent, staring at me like I had 3 heads. Then, Coasty burst out laughing. He started saying that I'd almost got him. I just stared at him, confused. I asked him what he was talking about. He responded saying that it was just like their local ghost legend. I shook my head, completely lost. Cody's smile faltered, and he exchanged a glance with the others before continuing. He then told me there was an urban legend where a girl named Susan was on her way home from school. As she was walking on the side of the road, someone had hit her and then drove away. Cody continued by saying the legend says that now the girl walks on the side of the road, waiting for someone to pick her up and take her home. The blood drained from my face. I told him to stop messing with me, but I could tell Cody was actually being serious now. Later that night, I drove back to the house. I went and knocked on the door, but no one answered. I researched and found out that no one had owned that house in a long time. Had I really given a ride to a ghost? I still don't know for sure, but I'll never forget that Halloween. It was Halloween night, 2019. I still can't fully comprehend what happened, and to this day it remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. My girlfriend Kate was over at my place. I had bought the house a few years back, and it had become our little tradition to pass out candy and watch scary movies on Halloween. It started out just like any other Halloween, kids dressed up, shouting trick or treat, running off with their candy. It was busy enough that we eventually brought our chairs to sit on the porch and just hand out candy. By around 9:30, the trick-or-treaters had thinned out and we hadn't had any more kids come by for about 20 minutes. We figured the night was winding down, so we packed it up, locked the door, turned off the porch light, and headed inside for our scary movie. I tossed the leftover candy on the coffee table and we settled onto the couch. We were about halfway through the movie when the doorbell rang. Kate and I exchanged surprised looks. I checked my phone. It was almost 11. I thought that it was pretty late for trick-or-treaters. I told Kate that maybe if we stayed quiet, they would just go away. Kate laughed and nudged me, telling me to go give those kids some candy. I sighed, grabbing the candy bowl and headed to the door. I opened it and immediately froze. Standing in front of me were 3 children. At least, they looked like children. Each of them had a white sheet draped over them, like some cliché ghost costume. Except something about them felt off. I awkwardly told them Happy Halloween, holding out the candy bowl, but the kids didn't move. They just stood there, silent, completely still. I quickly realized they didn't have bags for candy either. The weirdness of the situation crept over me. I scanned the yard, looking for their parents or anyone who might be with them, but there was no one. Just the still night and these motionless figures. They couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, but they just stood there, sheets draped over their heads, faces hidden. I asked them if they needed anything. No response. They didn't move an inch. Unease twisted in my stomach. Something about them didn't feel right. I slowly backed into the house, closing the door gently. As I locked it, I stood there for a moment, trying to shake the strange feeling. Kate walked over, seeing the look on my face. She asked me what was wrong. I honestly didn't even know what to tell her. I just said that there were 3 kids outside, with sheets over their heads. She gave me this weird look and laughed. She turned and opened the door, and sure enough, when she opened it, there they were, standing just as still as before. Her smile faded. Kneeling down to their level, she tried to make light of it. She told them that their costumes were creepy and asked if they were supposed to be ghosts. Still, no response, just the faint swaying of their bodies, as if the wind was moving them. But there was no wind. After a minute of trying to talk to them, Kate stood up, her expression mirroring my unease. I could tell she wanted to say something, but just like me, she didn't know what to say. I grabbed her arm and pulled her back inside, quickly closing the door again. We stood in silence for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. I suggested calling the police. Kate thought that was a little extreme, and said maybe we should just wait to see if they go away. We agreed to wait it out, hoping they'd be gone by the time we checked again. After a few minutes, we sat back down on the couch, trying to focus on the movie, but neither of us could relax. Suddenly, the doorbell erupted, ringing over and over as if someone was leaning on it and pressing it as fast as they could. We both jumped, our heart racing. I had enough. I was mad now. I marched towards the door, flinging it open, the doorbell still ringing until the second I opened it. But this time, the 3 figures weren't standing there. Instead, 3 white sheets lay crumpled on the ground, exactly where they had been standing. I stepped outside, frantically looking around, but there was no one, just silence. Kate appeared at the doorway, her face pale as she looked down at the sheets. She bent down and picked one of them up, but immediately dropped it, her scream cutting through the quiet night. I rushed to her side. I asked her what was wrong. She pointed at the sheet, unable to speak, her hands trembling. I picked up the sheet and saw it, a piece of paper lying underneath. On it was a crude drawing of 3 children with sheets over their heads, and in the drawing, they were brutally stabbing 2 people. Above the 2 figures in the drawings were our names, Joe and Kate. I shoved Kate inside, locking the door behind us as I called the police. They came, of course, but found nothing. No signs of the kids, no clues, nothing. Kate refused to stay at my house after that. We spent the next few nights at her apartment. It's been almost 5 years since that night, and we've never seen anything like it since. But every Halloween, I can't shake that fear that maybe those kids will come back. Halloween has always been my favorite holiday. There's something about the crisp air, the decorations, and the excitement on my kids' faces that just feels magical. Every year, without fail, we carve pumpkins before heading out to go trick-or-treating. It's a tradition that my 2 kids, Emma and Jake, ages 5 and 7, look forward to it more than anything. and it's always my job to get the pumpkins. This year, though, work had been insane. I'd been buried in deadlines, putting in more hours than I should have, and somehow I completely forgot to pick up the pumpkins. By the time Halloween Day rolled around, I realized I completely dropped the ball. After work, I rushed from store to store, but everywhere I went, the pumpkins left were either rotten or not fit for carving. Panic started setting in as I sat in my car trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to let my kids down. I could already picture their disappointed faces as I came home empty-handed. Desperate, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through social media, searching for any local farms or stores that might still have pumpkins. And that's when I stumbled across an old post in our town's Facebook group. It was from a few years back, advertising a small farm about 30 minutes outside of town that sold pumpkins. I figured it was a long shot, but I was out of options. I plugged the address into my GPS and set off. As I drove, I noticed the roads were becoming less familiar. This place was far outside the usual spots I'd go. Finally, after half an hour, I arrived. There was no sign, just a gate blocking off a large open field full of pumpkins, hundreds of them, untouched. I pulled up to the gate and got out of the car. There didn't seem to be anyone around, but the pumpkins were right there, waiting. I glanced towards the farmhouse in the distance, but there were no lights on, no cars in the driveway. For a moment, I hesitated. I wasn't one for stealing, but I was desperate, and I figured I could leave some money behind. I looked around one last time, then hopped the gate and walked into the pumpkin patch. It felt wrong, but I convinced myself it was harmless. I picked out 2 perfect pumpkins and quickly made my way back to the car. As I tossed them into the back seat, I gave the farmhouse another glance. That's when I saw someone standing on the porch. A figure, a man, stood there, still as a statue, staring directly at me. My heart sank. Maybe it was the farmer, or maybe I just gotten myself into a situation I didn't want to be in. Either way, I felt guilty. I couldn't just drive off with the pumpkins. I needed to make this right. So I jumped the gate again and started walking towards the house. As I got closer, the figure was gone. I looked around, confused, but there was no sign of him. Still, I was committed. I climbed the steps to the porch and knocked on the door. For a moment, nothing. Then, slowly, the door creaked open, revealing an old man, his face worn with age and shadowed by the dim light inside. He didn't say a word, just stood there, staring at me with dark, glassy eyes. I awkwardly introduced myself, trying to explain my situation to him. I pulled out some money and handed it to him, telling him I wanted to pay for the pumpkins. The old man didn't even look at the money. He just stared at me. An awkward silence stretched between us, and I began to feel uneasy. But then, he screamed. It was a sound I'd never heard before, like something from a nightmare. His face twisted with rage, his eyes wide and wild. The scream pierced through the air, chilling me to my core. I stumbled back, muttering an apology, but the old man's scream didn't stop. As I turned to leave, I heard the door slam behind me. I looked back and froze. The old man was standing at the edge of the porch, clutching a large butcher knife in his hand. His eyes locked onto mine, and without warning, he let out another inhuman scream and charged towards me. I didn't think. I just ran. My legs pumped faster than it ever had before. I sprinted for the gate, hearing his footsteps pounding behind me. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. Somehow, I made it over the gate and into my car, slamming the door shut just as he reached the fence. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I sped away, and there he was, standing by the fence, butcher knife raised in the air, his eyes still locked onto me. Later, I found out the old man who owned the farm hadn't been seen in years. I made it home that night, pumpkins intact, but every time I look at them, I remember that scream, that knife, and that look in that old man's eyes. Let's just say, I won't be waiting until the last minute to buy pumpkins ever again. During college, I worked at the university's annual haunted house attraction. It was a huge hit, especially on Halloween night, which was also its last open night each year. The attraction was held in an old, abandoned dorm that hadn't been used in years. Rumor had it that this place was actually haunted, but I never gave it much thought. It was probably just another campus legend. Halloween night was packed. Students flooded in, eager to get their scare fix. We stayed open until midnight, and as one of the staff, my job was to do a final walkthrough once the last group went through, making sure that no one got lost or was still lingering inside. Easy enough. I grabbed my flashlight and started the walkthrough, going room by room. The place was creepy for sure, but without actors and crowds, it was just an empty building filled with fake cobwebs and plastic skeletons. I didn't scare easily, and I knew the layout well enough to keep moving without a second thought. As I made my way through the halls, I eventually reached one of the last rooms in the attraction, the maze. This room was a claustrophobic labyrinth of mannequins twisted into different poses. There were no actors here, the stillness meant to unnerve people on its own. I always thought it was the creepiest room, but only because of how lifeless the mannequins looked. They didn't even need to move to make people feel uneasy. I started navigating through, my flashlight flicking across the rows of plastic bodies. As I stepped deeper into the maze, I heard a noise behind me. I stopped, turned, and shone my light. Nothing. It was probably just the building settling. This place was ancient after all. I shook off the brief spike of adrenaline and kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As I took another step forward, something caught my eye. One of the mannequins, just a head with no eyes, no mouth, nothing, seemed to have moved. It was positioned further into the path than I thought it had been a second ago. At least, that's what I thought. Was my mind playing tricks on me? I was frozen, just staring at it. The head was angled directly at me, blank and featureless, but it still felt like it was looking at me. My skin prickled and my heart sped up, but I tried to shrug it off. I was tired, that was all. It had to be my mind that was just playing tricks on me. I slowly moved past it, not daring to take my eyes off the thing. And when I was safely beyond it, I quickened my pace. The exit wasn't far now. I could see the door at the end of the room. Then, a loud crash echoed behind me, making me jump. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand. I scanned the area, but nothing seemed out of place. But I'd had enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I turned to head for the door, and my heart stopped. Every single mannequin that had been standing in front of me was now facing directly at me. All of them. I didn't have time to process it. It had to be a prank, right? Someone messing with me? But I wasn't sticking around to find out. I sped up, practically running for the door, refusing to look up at the mannequins again. When I finally reached the door, I flung it open and stepped through. For a brief moment, I hesitated. I turned back, my flashlight casting one last beam into the room. Every mannequin was back in its original position, except one. The one I had passed earlier was now standing just a few feet from the door, and it was staring directly at me. Then, slowly, its head moved. I slammed the door and ran out of that building, my heart pounding in my chest. That night stayed with me, and even now, I can't shake the feeling that something was in that old dorm and it had been watching me, waiting. It's safe to say that I never went back to that place again. When I was in high school, I convinced my parents to let me have a few friends over for Halloween. Claire, Lisa, and Izzy and I had the whole basement to ourselves, fully finished with a mini kitchen and even a half bath. It was the perfect setup for a spooky sleepover. We spent the earlier part of the night trick-or-treating, and then we headed back to my house, dumped our candy, and settled in for a movie. Around 10, my mom came downstairs to tell us that she was heading to bed. She reminded us to keep the noise down, and then went back upstairs. By midnight, we were wired, probably from all the sugar, and looking for something else to do. That's when Claire brought up Bloody Mary. Apparently, someone at school had done it and claimed they actually saw her. I'd never heard of the game, so Claire explained it to me. She said you have to go to the bathroom, turn off the lights, and stare into the mirror. You then have to say Bloody Mary 3 times, and then you can see her in the mirror. I laughed, saying there was no way that was real. Claire shrugged her shoulders. Izzy then shouted that we should all try it. Claire said if we do, we need to take turns and go in alone. The bathroom was the perfect place for this game. A single mirror hanging over the sink, and it was just big enough to make you feel uncomfortable if you stared at it for too long. I wasn't scared though, it was just a stupid game. Izzy went first. She lit a candle, walked into the bathroom, and closed the door. The 3 of us pressed our ears against it, listening to her whisper, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. A few seconds of silence followed before the door creaked open and Izzy came out. She laughed and pretended to be a ghost. We laughed, shaking our heads. Next was Lisa's turn. Same routine. 3 whispers of Bloody Mary, a brief silence, and then she came out, rolling her eyes, talking about how stupid this was. Claire went in after her, but even she came out of the bathroom with nothing to report. They then all looked at me. It was my turn. I walked towards the bathroom, rolling my eyes as Claire handed me the candle. Just as I was about to close the door, Claire stopped me. She said she realized she forgot that there was something else that we were supposed to do. We looked at her with wide eyes. She said you have to take a knife into the bathroom with you, and that's probably why it wasn't working. It seemed weird, but I shrugged. Claire and I went into the mini kitchen, grabbed a knife from one of the drawers, and walked back towards the bathroom. When I got inside, I looked at Claire, who was smiling, and gave me a thumbs up. I closed the door and placed the knife on the sink next to the candle, the flickering light casting long shadows across the wall. I stared into the mirror, feeling silly. While I knew nothing was going to happen, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little scared. I took a deep breath, then said the words, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." The room went silent. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Just the candle's soft glow and my own reflection staring back at me. Then I saw it. Movement in the corner of the mirror. I squinted. Was that a face? My heart skipped a beat as I stepped back. I turned around quickly, but before I could register what was happening, Izzy popped out from behind the door, laughing. I screamed and the others burst into the bathroom, howling with laughter. They'd tricked me. Izzy had snuck in before I even entered, crouching behind the door. That's why Claire wanted me to go get a knife. I shouted at them, telling them that it wasn't funny. I could feel my face flush with embarrassment. They were still laughing when suddenly, they all stopped. The room went dead quiet. I asked them what was wrong, but none of them answered. They just stood there looking at me with pure horror on their faces. Then Claire slowly lifted her hand, pointing just behind me. Izzy then screamed and ran out of the bathroom. Her scream must have broken Claire and Lisa out of their trance as they followed suit. My heart was pounding, but I didn't understand. What was their deal? I looked around the room. Everything seemed normal, until I turned back to the mirror. At first, I saw only my reflection, but then I noticed something was off. The person staring back at me wasn't me. She looked exactly like me, but her face was twisted into a wide, unnatural smile. My own lips were frozen, trembling. I wasn't smiling. I screamed and bolted out of the bathroom, sprinting up the stairs just as my parents were coming down, confused by all the noise. I yelled that someone was in the bathroom. My dad rushed down, but when he checked, there was no one there. Everything was back to normal. No weird reflection, no eerie presence, just a regular bathroom. My friends refused to come back over after that night, and I never talked about it again. But to this day, I still don't know what I saw in that mirror. Was it Bloody Mary? Or something much worse? It was Halloween night, one of my favorite nights of the year. My husband Ben and our son Josh and I made our way to the town's annual Halloween festival. It was small, but we loved it. Bonfires, rides, a mirror house, hay rides, and, of course, the corn maze. We always saved the maze for last. Something about wandering through the tall, twisted stalks of corn just as the night fell felt perfect for the holiday. After a fun day, we were finally headed to the corn maze. It was around 7:30, just starting to get dark. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of popcorn and firewood. As we reached the entrance, Ben suddenly stopped. He said he had forgot his camera and that he wanted to go back to get it. He told me to go on ahead and he would catch up. I nodded, grabbing Josh's hand and leading him into the maze. I could hear the excited chatter of families behind us as they entered too. The maze wasn't very big, 3 paths that looped around that led back to the entrance. We had done it every year, so I wasn't worried. We walked for a few minutes, passing a couple of families on their way out. Josh seemed excited, pointing at every shadow that moved. Then Josh tugged on my hand. He yelled "Mom" and pointed to one of the walls of corn off to our right. There, hidden behind rows of stalks, there was a narrow opening. I didn't remember this path from the map. It was small, almost as if the corn had bent on its own to create a doorway. Josh's eyes lit up and asked me if we could go that way. I hesitated. Ben hadn't caught up with us yet, and I didn't want him to miss out on the walk. I looked back to see if he was coming, but there was no sign of him. Josh kept tugging on my arm, so I gave in with a sigh. We stepped through the gap, the corn closing in around us. The path was narrow and wound around sharply, but it seemed to go on forever. After a few minutes, I started to feel uneasy. The maze wasn't big enough for a path to go on this long. I slowed down and turned around, trying to remember where we had come from, but that's when my stomach dropped. The path behind us was gone. It was like the corn had swallowed it whole. The way back was completely sealed off. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm for Josh's sake. I didn't think he had realized what was going on yet, as he was still excited and wanting to go further down the path. I pulled out my phone to call Ben, but there was no service. The more we walked, the more it felt like we were going in circles, yet never finding a way out. The maze wasn't that big, but somehow we just couldn't find the exit. The sky had fully darkened now, the only light coming from my phone's dim screen. By this point, Josh could sense something was wrong. He kept asking where his dad was and that he was ready to go home. I told him we were leaving. I tried to sound confident, but inside, panic was creeping in. We'd been walking what felt like ages. The corn seemed endless, and every time I glanced back, the path behind us had disappeared again. It was like the maze was alive, closing in on us. I picked Josh up and started walking faster, then running, hoping to stumble back onto the main trail. The corn stalk slapped against my arms and legs, but no matter how far I ran, there was no way out. The maze seemed to be toying with us, trapping us inside. After what felt like forever, I tripped, falling into the ground and dropping Josh. My face hit the dirt, pain shooting through my cheek. I scrambled up quickly, hearing Josh's cries, but when I looked around, I froze. The corn was gone. We were in an open space, the entrance to the maze. I heard shouting and looked up to see 2 police officers running towards us. They scooped Josh and me up. They asked if I was Diana. I nodded, completely dazed. How did they know my name? What was going on? They hurried us to the parking lot where a crowd had gathered, all staring at me. An EMT checked us over, but I couldn't focus on anything until I saw Ben running towards us. His face was pale, tears streaming down his cheeks as he hugged us both tightly. I asked him what was going on. His response, well, it still haunts me to this day. He said that we never came out of the corn maze, and that the police had been searching for us for almost 48 hours. The crowd of people were members of the community who had come to set up a search party. I stared at him in disbelief. What he was telling me couldn't be possible. I knew we had been in the maze for a while, but 2 whole days? That was impossible. None of this made any sense, and to this day, I don't know what happened in that corn maze. Josh doesn't remember anything, but I'll never forget that feeling of being lost, trapped in something that was far more than just a maze.